Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Pathways to Excellence. Right here we have a very special guest, Dr. Ong Kian Ming. It's a pleasure to have you, Doctor, and thank you so much for taking the invitation to have this interview.
Yeah, thanks Victor for coming to Taylor's University Lakeside campus. I'm sure
These are your home grounds at this point, aren't they, Doctor?
Yeah, I've had a lot of meetings here, but the first time I'm recording some sort of a video or podcast. Starbucks here in Taylor's Lakeside. Yeah.
There is a first for everything in this world. The world is a strange and wonderful place.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so alright, now to those of you viewers out there, so essentially Pathways to Excellence is a program to showcase Malaysian talents and to also talk about education on a societal level in terms of its, well, benefits, its impacts essentially to society at large. We aim to showcase essentially Malaysian talents to the world and abroad. And so, Doctor, well, if you could maybe, would you share a little bit about, well, how, I guess, Taylor's became your stomping ground? Maybe we could start by talking a little bit about, I guess, how you actually got to this point.
Sure. Yeah. So you're talking about talent, showcasing talent. I think Malaysia has a lot of talent. Of course, a lot of talent do leave our shores. We hope to be able to get some of them back. But one of the value propositions that I found very attractive that landed me here at Taylor's University was starting a new program. We mentioned philosophy, politics, economics, or PPE for short. Not protective equipment. But some people have confused my program with the other sort of PPE.
I see.
But yeah, I mean, the education PPE is a program that will be the first of its kind in Malaysia. There's only one other program in Southeast Asia that was launched in NUS in 2018. So the fact that I can be program director for this new program was one of the main reasons why I landed up here at Taylor's after my decision not to contest as a member of parliament.
I see. Wow. Okay. It certainly looks like this is one of the many things that you've been undertaking. Like what with, for example, doing YouTube videos with Keluar Sekejap, going hiking
with Kyrie and Shariel.
Yeah. Kyrie and Shariel. Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Going hiking with you and your friends. Yeah. Among other things.
Amongst other things. Okay. Cool. When are you going next time?
Next hike, I just came back from a hike with the CEO of Penjana Capital, Taufik Iskandar, up to Mayor's Hill in KL. I'll be doing a few runs this weekend.
Wow.
Not sure when the next time will be. Yeah.
Wow. Respect. I hope to be like you when I go out.
It's okay, we can go running anytime you want.
If I go running with you, I get the feeling that for the first minute right there, it's like, oh, okay, alright, yes, we're running together. Then the next minute that when he goes.
No, it's okay. I can adjust my pace accordingly. That's not an issue. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, Doctor, what is your pace now? If you want to run let's say 1 km, what's your average?
Maybe if I run
if you run all out, kind of
all out, maybe I can go a 4 minute per kilometer pace.
Yeah.
But
you're not human. Maybe can you describe, I guess, your journey in Malaysian politics from serving as the Deputy Minister of Trade to becoming the MP of Bangi?
I thought it would be interesting for me to share my journey as a Member of Parliament as well as Deputy Minister and its relevance to education today, especially in the role that I've been given.
Sure.
Because I think very few MPs, very few people in government would come and join or rejoin academia in my case, and even fewer of them would have the opportunity to basically design a new education program, such as the one that I'm doing here in Taylor's
for sure, yeah.
For the PPE program. But I want to bring as many experiences I've had as a Member of Parliament, serving my constituency, knowing the local issues, knowing how these local issues can relate to issues of public policy, issues of even local economics. That's one. And then the other area would be my service as a Deputy Minister, former Deputy Minister, and still helping out the current government on various policy-related issues in my former ministry, the Ministry of now it's called Ministry of Investments, Trade and Industry. So to be able to bring those kind of policy experiences at the national level, even the international level, to reflect and to incorporate into the PPE program so that students can benefit from that. And then the third part would be my experience serving in party politics. Because in political science, party politics is something that is part and parcel of different core curriculums and modules. Right? So to be able to bring that experience in a very real way and to be able to expose students to this kind of experience.
perhaps, Doctor, if you could elaborate maybe on, well, a specific case study that you would have in mind, like something that I guess you would choose to perhaps demonstrate to students, right?
Yeah.
That perhaps, is only possible because you have been in politics before. Like, if you were to choose like a case study, then like, what might you have in mind?
Sure, there's a lot to choose from, but I pick one that's probably quite close to my heart.
Sure.
So, when you talk about public policy with regards to, let's say, flood mitigation, right? You need to have the kind of infrastructure to be able to prevent the worst excesses when there's heavy rainfall. That you're talking about bunds, you're talking about deep enough drains, you're talking about better flow of water, especially in some of the low-lying areas. So this is part and parcel of public policy that you can, talk about from a environmental and design perspective. So I have that experience because I've been involved in this kind of negotiations from the policy side as a local MP. But at the same time, I also have the practical experience of having to go and save flood victims.
Wow.
So I'm not sure whether you remember there were very serious floods in Selangor at the end of December.
I recall, yeah.
So what I did was I was then the only MP, probably still, I don't think any other MPs has gone out to, procure kayaks. I happen to have 3 kayaks in my constituency office.
Oh, okay.
Because I actually take these kayaks down onto the rivers to do expeditions, to look at places where there have been soil erosion and stuff like that. So I deployed these kayaks, brought them to this place called Taman Sri Muda in Shah Alam, and started rescuing people out of that place. So my unique experience is as somebody with the policy exposure, as well as on the ground exposure of doing these kinds of flood rescues. And I think these kind of experiences can really enrich a discussion session within classrooms, I think, and also be able to let people see that this is something that affects the livelihood of real people on the ground.
Nice. Incredible. So I guess, currently the program isn't really like in place just yet, right?
Yeah, so we submitted our documents to the Malaysian Qualifications Agency, and it will hopefully we'll be able to get it approved by the end of the year, and we'll start the marketing process in Q1 next year, with the idea of launching the program in August 2024. That will be the first batch of our students coming.
Amazing! Wow, they are in for a very interesting experience, I'm sure.
I hope so. Obviously, being a new program, there will be some kinks here and there, but still in the process of recruiting more qualified lecturers to be part and parcel of this program. But I'm fairly confident that at the end of 3rd year, the first batch of students would have undergone a very unique experience, and batches following them will also have a very, very unique exposure in these 3 fields of philosophy, politics, and economics.
Amazing. Okay, cool. Well, speaking of education, so then would you maybe share some of your educational experiences? You might share your experiences from your time at Raffles, but maybe could you start even earlier than that before
Yeah, sure.
eventually?
So I think all of my educational experiences actually impacts my role as a policy maker and now also as a program director. So for example, I studied in Salle Petaling Jaya, in sort of like a suburb of Kuala Lumpur in PJ. In a quite multiracial setting and with pretty good teachers. I think that was when my education base was built, being taught different subjects at a certain level, and that prepared me to go to the next level, which was to pursue my O-levels and A-levels as an ASEAN scholar in Raffles Institution in Singapore. When I went to Singapore, it was a whole new ball game. We're talking about some of the most hardworking and smart and brilliant students in
the entirety of Singapore.
In the whole of Singapore.
I do have heard about Raffles for a very long time, and in fact, like one of the reasons that I learned how to write effectively was because of Raffles KS book. Every single year there's a publication of the best general paper essays in the entirety of Singapore. Yeah, sorry about that one.
Yes, I think the best general paper essays would be from Raffles.
Definitely
be of pretty good quality.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I happened to be placed in the best class in the best school in Singapore. So
oh yeah, for sure.
That was quite an eye-opening experience.
Raffles is no joke. There's a school of Robert Hua.
Tony Hua, he was my senior in Raffles, and also many other people. So RI celebrated its 200th anniversary,
right?
bicentennial this year. So
You actually went to the bicentennial.
I wanted to go, but because of different commitments, I couldn't. But I was still keeping track of it from afar.
I see.
I
Yeah.
still have many friends that I keep in touch with who are from my class, and also others from different generations of our.
Yeah, it must have been an incredible experience because I saw that Chan Chun Sing had gone and also Goh Chok Tong had been in attendance also.
Goh Chok Tong was the Prime Minister when I was studying there. Sometimes in the morning when I leave, walk out from my hostel, I was staying just off Jalan Bukit Timah. His house was actually there. So sometimes I would see him, in his car, in his motorcade when I would walk out to take the bus. And I shared that story with him maybe 2 months ago when I had a 1-hour chat with him at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. I've met Chan Chun Sing before, who's now the Minister of Education,
I see.
a couple of times. In my capacity as Deputy Media Minister, he was the Minister of Media at the time. And of course, one of the Singapore ministers now, who is the Minister for National Development, Desmond Lee, he used to sit behind me in class. We were very good friends. We still keep in touch.
That is a very storied high school experience.
And Desmond is somebody I admire greatly. He is somebody with a lot of empathy, with a very cool head on his shoulders, and he's done a lot in his capacity as Member of Parliament, and as well as Minister.
I see. Wow. And you even also met James Lim recently, right?
James Lim is also from the same year as me in Raffles. We have similar background in the sense that he's an academia now, I'm in academia now.
Yeah.
He got his PhD in economics and my PhD in political science. Both of us studied in the US. There were a lot of interesting policy areas that we had good discussions on.
Sure, wow. When Stanford Raffles tell the call,
yes.
cast from me. Yeah.
That's right. Yes, right. So I'll sing the entire song, but I will skip out one part. The part where it says the sons of Singapore. So I skip that part because everything else I will sing, but I'm a Malaysian.
Yeah.
So I would leave that part out.
Okay. All right then. Maybe can you share a little bit about how those educational experiences eventually contributed to your interest in politics, if they did at all?
Going back to Singapore, I think one of the things I saw at Raffles and in the larger education system in Singapore was that they were very progressive and forward-thinking in how to nurture and develop talent. And one of the ways they did this was through hiring and preparing and training very, very good teachers, putting in the right structures and systems to allow students to achieve the best of their academic potential. And then at the same time, trying their best also to encourage holistic development. And so when I was in Singapore, I played chess for the school. I represented the school in athletics. I played hockey. I was in the Interact Club. So definitely they gave a lot of opportunities for us to develop our leadership skills.
I see.
And other skills in other areas. So I attended an outward bound school enrichment program. And coincidentally, Desmond was also part of that program. I'm not sure whether he still remembers, but they were interesting times for all the people involved.
Okay, I can imagine. Wow. So then, now when we talk about, I guess, like leadership right there, so like I guess like there are many forms of leadership, right? So then, what led you to take, I guess, like the particular path of, I guess, like politics rather than like some of the path?
Could be in the corporate world. I think most people of my background,
Sure.
before I had gone to university, I would have chosen that path. And I was in that world for a short while.
Right.
At
BCG, right?
Yeah, I was an associate consultant at the Boston Consulting. It was a very, very good experience. I learned a lot from that. In fact, I just visited, my former office and spoke to my former colleague who's now the senior partner. I could have taken that path. I could have taken the path of academic leadership as well, because I did join the university after coming back from my PhD. I chose the political pathway, at least for that period of time, about 10 years, because I thought that, number one, I had a unique voice to contribute from a policy perspective, given my educational experience and my corporate experience. And then number two, I wanted to be part and parcel of a team. At that time, people like Tony Pua, Hannah Yo, Yo Bi Yin, Tiony Cheng, Liu Chin Tong, and others were part and parcel of this younger team of leaders in the DAP. Stephen Sim as well. that really brought about a different kind of youthful energy. I'm glad to see that this kind of tradition is continuing in my party with the people, the likes of Michelle Ng, who is the Adun for Subang Jaya, Lim Yiwei, Adun for Kampung Tungku, Jamalia, Jamaluddin, who is now Exco of Selangor, as well as Adun for and of course my successor in Bangi, Charizan Johan, a young lawyer. So, part and parcel of the leadership journey also entails not just developing yourself as a leader, but also training and giving space for others to be able to lead themselves and bringing up the new generation of leaders, which is what I'm trying to do under this PPE program.
Amazing. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Well, if we could then, could we maybe speak a little bit about, I guess, your educational experiences like overseas? You've pursued essentially a very storied education, like from, I think it was, London School of Economics, Bachelor.
Starting with Raffles
in
right? Singapore. Yeah.
Raffles in Singapore.
Yeah. And then going to LSE in the UK.
LSE in the UK, then Cambridge for Masters,
yeah.
and then Duke for PhD, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Right, okay.
I think ChatGPT said I was from Harvard, is it, or something like that?
Yeah, ChatGPT. So I literally asked ChatGPT about Dr. Ong right here, and you'll see the screenshot shortly. It said that he went to Harvard, but
Yeah, no, I visited Harvard. I visited Cambridge, and
maybe it was like, oh, like you had a tweet somewhere where it's like, oh, visited Harvard one day, and then
Yeah.
like, they were like, oh, okay.
yeah, but I think my Duke affiliation is pasted across all of my social media. Yeah. But yeah, going back to the education
Sure.
process. Yeah.
So maybe could you share a little bit about how your degrees have shaped your worldview and how, I guess, like you want to, I guess, implement some of the things that you learned in, I guess, cultivating the next generation through the PPE program?
Now, I definitely admit that I've been very fortunate in my education journey. Of course, I had to work hard to get through, to be able to apply successfully and enter into those educational institutions. But definitely, I would attribute some of it to being at the right place at the right time as well. So, having been given these kinds of exposures, I want to see how perhaps some of what I've learned in various countries can be brought back to Malaysia and put into the PPE program in a very unique way. And it's not just about how I see the PPE program, but it's also about the different lecturers and academics that I want to bring into the ecosystem to teach, to manage, to show their experiences and their education kind of prowess within the PPE program as well. So it's not just me alone, it's me and my team. But obviously, being the program director, I would have a lot of influence and responsibility in terms of shaping the flavor and the content of the program.
For sure.
Just give an example. You studied in the US, right?
Yes.
So you would have seen how vibrant the education system is in the US.
100%.
And of course, when you
Oh, yes.
interact with your lecturers and professors in the US, they basically encourage you to speak your mind, correct?
They do. 100%.
So whereas in the Malaysian context, students are more reserved. Right? They don't really speak out as much, for societal, cultural, and whatever other reasons. That's something that I hope to change in the PPE program. We want to even incorporate, your class contribution, which is something that's quite normal in the US.
Right, yeah. Maybe like 20-30% participation rate. If you don't speak up, then basically, you better speak up, otherwise like you're going to get the C for the semester.
Yes, exactly. at least for the participation component of the program or the module.
Okay, amazing. Cool. Let's now move into a discussion of the significance of education for Malaysia. Now, I've been reading a number of articles recently about, for example, people in Malaysia moving towards gig-based jobs as opposed to, for example, going into higher education. We also see that there is essentially the worrying trend of, for example, graduates from university essentially becoming unemployed. So then, now when you think about like all these developments, right? Well, I guess can you share like some of your thinking about like these developments?
Yeah, so let me start with the question on the gig economy workers first. If let's say you have very good programming skills and you know exactly what you need to learn in order to become a good programmer, you don't really need to get a university degree per se. Especially in this day and age where you are able to secure jobs from all around the world. As long as you are able to come out with the output, and the output is good, clients are willing to pay. Right? So from that perspective, the gig economy on the higher end, on the service end, it really challenges universities to show their value. Why should I need to come to university when I can learn all this through massive online courses, for example? And I can curate the experience much better compared to going to university and having to take certain core modules and whatnot, right? So that's for the gig economy part. However, in response, I would say this. The purpose of the university is not just for you to learn those skills. Those skills are important. But it's also about the larger purpose of going to the university, whereby your mind gets challenged by talking to lecturers, professors, and even fellow students. That's something that you may not get if, let's say, you're just learning online about a particular course or program where you're picking up skills for you to participate in the gig economy. That's right. Second thing is, living life in this world also requires certain social interaction skills.
For sure.
Even if, let's say, you want to do everything online through Zoom and even emailing and things like that, you need to be able to do things that are societally relevant and also appropriate. That's something else that you can pick up in university as well. By talking to, fellow students, participating in different social activities, clubs and whatnot. That's the second thing. And then I think that the third thing about the relevance of universities, this specifically pitching to the gig economy guys, is that you want to be associated with some sort of an educational institution so that you can leverage on things like networks, professional networks, alumni, and to be able to pitch yourself in that way, right? So even if, let's say, you're the best programmer in the world, you definitely can make a good living, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, when you go out, you want to be a CEO, you want to be, moving up, let's say, you don't want to stay forever in the gig economy, you want to join an institution. Then there is some value to be attached to having an institutional affiliation, because people will ask you, oh, where do you go for university? But then you have to explain, oh, actually I didn't go to university, I took all these online courses, blah 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 and stuff like that, right? So why not just go to a university and be plugged into the network? That will, I think, also be value added in the long run for you and for even for the university that you belong to.
Well said, thank you. More broadly, Doctor, could you share, I guess, what you think is the significance of education in terms of developing the nation of Malaysia?
Where do I start? I mean, this is such a broad question.
It is a deep question, yeah.
So education affects the development of human capital in Malaysia.
For sure.
And this affects every single aspect of life in Malaysia. If you're sick, when you go and see a doctor, the doctor has to be trained somewhere, right? If, let's say, you want to go to, have a certain service at a government department, right? You have to be served by somebody. We are not at the stage where everything is, through AI and robots. That person will have to be trained, through the educational process. When you want our policy makers, whether it's politicians or senior civil servants, to come up with good policies, they need to be trained somewhere from their educational perspective. If you want people to sort of lead innovation, whether it's in the startup space or in established companies, they need to be trained somewhere from an educational perspective. So whatever that you can think of, in every single area of life, education makes a huge impact. But of course, then the follow-up question would be, what do you think we need to do to improve the education system? I think that's probably too big of a topic to go into right now. I will only say that for my PPE program at least, I hope that the intake, whether it's 30 people, 20 or 40 people, this can be an area where I can influence directly the education exposure for students who want to understand more about public policy, want to understand more about economics, applied economics in the real world, want to understand some of the philosophical underpinnings of different thought systems in the developed as well as the developing world. This is where I can play more substantive contribution.
Amazing. Perhaps it might be indeed too broad of a question to think about how, I guess, education at large would essentially influence society at large. But I guess from your point of view then, with regards to the specific program that I guess you are implementing at this point,
Yeah.
would you share, I guess, some of your thinking about how being school, I guess, like different systems of thought, right, can add value, I guess, to our society as a whole?
I think one of the challenges that we're facing now, not just in Malaysia but in many other countries, is the lack of flexibility in our thinking. So, you hear about political polarization, for example, and then people are very weeded into their own modes of thinking, and they cannot look at things from the other side. They cannot be more holistic in terms of their different perspectives.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I think one of the advantages, I think, of a program like the PPE program that I'm designing, or even more talking about education more generally, especially at the higher order thinking level, we need to have this kind of intellectual flexibility. It is not to say that we compromise on our principles, but I need to be able to look at somebody from a different, who has a different kind of background, somebody in Malaysia, for example, who has a more religious upbringing, having lived in, let's say, some more rural parts of the east coast of Peninsular Malaysia with maybe not so much interaction with different racial groups. I need to be able to look at that person's perspective and say, look, there is value in what you are thinking, and there's importance in why you are thinking and feeling that way, rather than to say, oh look, your thinking is backward, your thinking is not suitable to modernity and things like that. I think that's a very condescending way of looking at things, and we need to have, I think, a more inclusive kind of education system or thinking that will be able to incorporate all these kinds of different views.
For sure. I remember very distinctly during your Keluar Sekejap interview, you were basically speaking about how, well, if you think about, like, say, a green wave narrative, for example, like in Malaysia,
which I don't agree with.
Exactly. So you don't agree with. So you quite, I guess, like adamantly insisted that, like, you have to basically think about, well, the perspectives of these people. They have like real, I guess, reasons for perhaps voting the way that they did. And
yes, and then there are different groups within that larger group, especially among the Malay community that voted for Perikatan Nasional. And we need to address those concerns in a very real way. We may not be able to, I'm talking about, putting on my hat as a politician from Pakatan Harapan. We may not be able to address all those things in a short period of time.
Right.
But we need to be able to systematically address each one of those issues somewhere along the next 3 to 4 years.
For sure, yeah. Because we do live in a democratic society, and you can't just conveniently take people out of your country just because you don't like their perspectives.
Yeah,
So,
no, and
exactly.
And people, whose thinking is more aligned with my own way of thinking. We wouldn't want it if let's say the other side comes into power and say that, look, you guys have no space under the Malaysian sun. I think that's unacceptable, on all sides.
I see. Incredible. Well, thank you for sharing that perspective. Well, if you could, then perhaps let's move, I guess, from, the lens of different systems of thinking over to now considering, well, the question of broader, global competitiveness and also relevance in a sense right here. In the past couple of years, well, we had essentially
a lot of uncertainty with regards to politics, a lot of changes in leadership,
changes in leadership, and then of course, there were the broad economic questions that were raised by the COVID pandemic and various other things of that nature. Where do you see, Malaysia as it stands right now in terms of its competitiveness, and how do you see the education system adapting towards that?
That's a question I think of a lot. I just came back from Singapore yesterday. Had very good interactions with different people at different levels, and clearly showed to me that there are areas where Malaysia definitely not just can learn from Singapore, but in some ways we also sometimes shortchange ourselves by not realizing some of the strengths that we have, which perhaps even Singapore can learn from. Right. So whenever we talk about this global competitiveness index or ranking, Malaysia actually does pretty okay. We are usually number 2 in ASEAN behind Singapore. And I think many people sometimes don't give Malaysians enough credit because they see the government, they see politicians, and then they see it as not being a very good reflection of how Malaysia is like, and then that translates into something negative.
Pardon me, but would you maybe operationalize like your understanding of like what it means to actually do well in a global competitiveness index? Because like if you think about like competitiveness, right, I think that's a very big concept. Like you might think of like situational selection or something else of that nature, but in what way does Malaysia do well in those particular regards?
Okay, so under those rankings, there are certain formal definitions which are important to measure, which shows Malaysia being relatively competitive. So, for example, our bureaucracy is relatively efficient. So, for example, if you want to set up a company in Malaysia, it doesn't take like a few months or sometimes in some countries a year. That's pretty good. You know, a lot of things have been digitalized, made online, sped up by the pandemic, and we are also pretty lucky in the sense that although English is not a national language, many people speak it. We function relatively well in English, and there are many avenues for foreign investors to come to set up in Malaysia and being able to use English in a very holistic, comprehensive way.
Absolutely.
Yep. So those are just some of the formal aspects. You know, approval of government grants, approval of building permits and things like that. We can improve, but we're actually not too bad. So those are some of the formal definitions. But I think there are also things which are more, maybe a little bit harder to measure, but it exists out there in the ecosystem. So for example, if I have a certain coding problem, if I throw it out there, crowdsource solutions, actually Malaysians are pretty good. I talk to other people who are occupying this IT space, who are pretty good. The other country that's pretty good is actually Vietnam. They have a very good software development capabilities, and Indonesia also has pretty good these kinds of talent as well because the country is big, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think for me, when it comes to this kind of global competitiveness, infrastructure and ecosystem, we need to know our strengths and weaknesses. But at the same time, I don't think we should shortchange ourselves so much to say that in a decade's time, Vietnam is going to overtake us. So some people say that, and I do not necessarily disagree with them from certain perspectives. But so Vietnam has already overtaken us from a GDP perspective. But why don't you turn the question around and say, look, how can we work together with Vietnam so that both our economies can benefit from interacting with one another, both our people can benefit from working with one another, and then both of us can improve and increase our vitality and our prosperity at the same time.
A rising tide lifts all boats.
Yes, correct.
Okay, wonderful. So then, moving on to then, I guess, more broad philosophical questions, but also perhaps with a tinge of practicality. Then, could you share a little bit about, how you think, for example, education and economic development would be interlinked with one another? Because, of course, when it comes to, say, economic development, right, so there are like these questions of like, can your country get investments? Like, of course, we did get Tesla, essentially. That's like one of the things that we did get recently. Small wins, celebrate the wins. But of course, country.
I think in the example that you gave just now, what you're saying is that for foreign direct investment to come to Malaysia, they need to be attracted by the talent pool that we have here.
Right.
And we do have it, in different areas. The kind of FDI has come and continue to come to Malaysia forms a very wide variety. So you have the big manufacturing concerns from Europe, from Japan, from China, from the US that invest heavily in, let's say, the E&E ecosystem, your semiconductor players and so on and so forth. So they come to Malaysia because they like some talent pool. We have a good technical staff here. We have a staff of relatively skilled labor, and also we have people who can occupy the middle as well as upper management. And then we have people who are coming to Malaysia to use Malaysia as their base for their global business centers. So this would be players like Shell, Experian, Accenture, for example. Many of the big service industry people that see Malaysia together with India and China as a very good location for some of these, what they call shared services, but now increasingly it's becoming more value added. Right? So they are attracted to the talent pool. Of course, we don't have all the talent. We still need to get talented people from India, from other parts of Southeast Asia, from Japan, to form that part of the ecosystem. But I think what is the other relevant question is, how does economic development actually improve, for example, or affect the provision of education? So as Malaysia has become richer, the number of private schools has also increased, right? Either at the primary, secondary, and even the tertiary level. So the challenge would be, how can these private institutions also contribute to the development of human capital? And I'm glad to say that for a place like Taylor's and other private universities, what we can do is to hopefully retain some of the homegrown talent that would otherwise have gone to Singapore, UK, US to further their degrees, to study their undergrad and perhaps postgrad degrees. Have them come and stay in Malaysia and contribute to the local ecosystem, be able to also contribute to building up the intellectual capacity in these academic institutions, and then when they go out into the workplace, they will be able to, supply their services to some of these multinationals, some of the big GLCs in Malaysia, and some of them may end up being entrepreneurs themselves. And that will be another way in which you can uplift the economy, contribute to innovation, and all the good things that politicians like to talk about.
You say that now that you're not.
I would say that these are things which all people like.
Yeah, of course.
I think many politicians want to see that happen, but perhaps they don't have the same kind of training and exposure that I do, so they may not be able to know how to actualize some of these things on the ground, how to put in policies to put these pathways of excellence into the education as well as the economic pipelines in the country.
Amazing, cool. All right then. So thank you so much for that sharing. Now, if you could, can you discuss how, I guess, we may use methodologies or, like, for example, data-driven approaches to understand, I guess, like, education or like its role essentially in the society and economy more? Like, if you were to essentially like try to like measure, for example, the impact of education upon like Malaysia and how it will develop over the course of time, like what will you try to do?
I think what you're saying is being able to measure educational outcomes.
Right.
This is something that's quite tricky to do. Of course, we have our PISA test scores, for science and math and all that. That's sort of like to benchmark against international standards. We can better, in those test scores. But I think more important is how do we actually evaluate the effectiveness of teachers in being able to add value to the educational experience of students. And this is where some of the measurement metrics comes into play. It should not be purely on an exam basis, right? It's got to be, not just being able to read, write, the 3 R's, but more than that, how do teachers actually help somebody's emotional development, somebody's development in terms of their social skills? How does the education system help the person develop as a person of with a certain level of ethics and integrity, right? This is not by teaching moral classes alone, right? It's part and parcel of the larger educational rubric that you need to inculcate and you need to design and plan.
For sure. Right? You just brought up traumatic memories of remembering that amanah adalah sikap bertanggungjawab yang dapat membuat.
It's okay. The fact that you can remember it shows that there has been some impact. But it cannot be just things that we recite. It's got to be things that we inculcate and practice as part and parcel of our daily lives.
For sure. Yes, absolutely. Well, I guess now if you were to think about how, I guess, society should think about educational development going forward and how, I guess, like even average citizens can, I guess, move forward and advocate for like essentially better education. And so, like, do you have any like ideas in mind on how we can do that, or how it would perhaps lead to a materially different set of outcomes, policies?
Because education policy within the Ministry of Education is very hard to move. It's a very big animal. I would suggest anyone with interest in education policies or experimentation, try it in sort of like pilot projects first. And these pilot projects may be more suitable to be implemented in private schools, even schools, let's say, for the refugee community. Right? So more more flexible arrangements would probably be something that I think may be easier to implement and test out compared to going to the Ministry of Education and say, hey, I have a novel way of teaching science and math, why don't you implement it? That's not going to happen so easily.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, Now, my last question for you then, I guess, is would you maybe share your thoughts on the benefits of education for the people of Malaysia, like whatever stage of life it is that they're in, perhaps. So like, not sure whether you talk about like like ongoing education that a person might have, like even as they become adults, or maybe like the decision to take forward education. Feel free to respond to the question in a way that seems most natural to you. And if you could maybe also leave us with a message about, I guess, why do you believe that education is the right way kind of going forward?
Sure.
Particularly since like you're actually working educator, like you're actually in the role, like you're in Theodore Roosevelt's words, the man in the arena.
Sure.
Like that's respect. Yeah.
So I think for me, one of the biggest challenges as somebody who's in the education space is trying to make whatever that we are teaching or we want to teach relevant to the real world.
Right.
And this applies across all different levels of education.
Yeah.
If the person that you're teaching, whether it's somebody in a primary, secondary, or tertiary setting, sees that the skills that we're picking up, the knowledge that we're picking up, can actually be relevant or applied to a real world context, that is something that would be very, very powerful. So if let's say I'm learning basic programming now, if whatever Python skills that I pick up, let's say at the secondary school level, at the tertiary level, I'm able to very quickly use those skills to be able to run codes to extract live data that's coming out from a government website. And then I use the data to pump it into some sort of an app that I'm developing, right? Then you'll be able to see the relevance of it immediately. Of course, that's something a little bit more high level, but it could be something more basic. So, for example, if let's say I'm teaching you science with regards to temperature differentials, and I can use the temperature differential explanation to say that this is how it affects weather patterns, and this will affect whether or not it will rain in the evening, and that may affect whether you can play football or not in the evening when you want to go out and play with your friends, right? Then suddenly people can see, hey, this is something that's relevant for me. So that's part and parcel of, I think, the challenge of any educator.
Great. Thank you so much. May I ask you a bonus question?
Sure.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts about artificial intelligence, especially in like this modern era, and like how should the people of Malaysia or the world at large, right, prepare for a world where essentially artificial intelligence continues to proliferate and in turn has the capacity to essentially, I guess, perform a larger variety of tasks?
Yeah, I mean, AI has been around for quite some time already. When you're talking about chatbots that have in existence, when you talk about automation of a lot of processes, those are what I would term as more entry-level kind of automation and AI. Now, I think the difference is that with the proliferation of large language models or LLM, you have these generative AI models, and from these kinds of generative AI models and systems, you are able to allow AI to perform tasks that in the past were not thought possible to be done. And then also you have better materials, better technology with regards to sensing LiDAR and whatnot that allows this ecosystem to grow even more sophisticated. So that's the kind of trend that we see happening. It's very hard to prevent, and I think rather than to try to say that, oh, we shouldn't do this and that in the AI space, I think we should actually see how AI can be used to enhance the human experience and to be able to allow humans to be able to do more value-added activities and services. So a lot of stuff which lawyers are doing now from a perspective of vetting documents, those are actually things that are relatively dumb and can be automated. So leave the lawyers to do more higher value-added thinking with regards to analyzing cases, looking at different precedents, looking at how to argue for cases, right? That's just one example in the legal field. Every single field will be changed by generative AI, and I'm pretty excited to see how this would change, for example, even the education space that I'm operating in.
Amazing. Thank you, Doctor.
Thanks for having me.
Also,
Hope the conversation has been
thank you so much.